Hey, it's Robert with Hush Performance and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be working on a bucket list project. I call it bucket list because it's something that I've been wanting to develop for maybe well over a decade now. And what you're looking at behind me is a cable transmission out of an 88 to 91 Honda Civic CRX wagon, if it's front wheel drive, sedan. It's a standard style transmission, whether it's an LX, a DX, an EX, an SI. It's an L3 casing. Really the only way that you're gonna know what's inside of it is really by counting gears. This transmission actuates via cable. There's a cable that comes from the clutch pedal that attaches to this bracket here, and then the throwout bearing clutch fork arm. As you push on the pedal then pushes the arm up, and then the arm engages the throwout bearing into the pressure plate. Here at Hush Performance, we're known for cable to hydro conversions in the 88 to 91 Honda Civics. Most of the guys that are needing to go hydraulic are doing that because they're using a hydraulic B series, or they're doing a K series, or some other transplant that the transmission is actuated by a hydraulic system. But there's still guys out there that still have issues with the cable, or still have a heavy duty pressure plate using this transmission, and then the cable is an issue with this transmission just like it's an issue with the other transmissions. The pedal assembly either snaps in half, the cable will stretch, or even break. Now that our shop has the means of being able to produce this stuff on mass scale, we'll be able to build a bracket onto some existing hardware here and then utilize what we have here. And I've done this before, but we've only done it one time, and we're actually looking at making a production model here. So I'll just set the camera up on a tripod as we kind of work it out. All right, we got all our arts and crafts out. Plan to use a 9295 Civic slave cylinder. On the part that we made 10 years ago, we mounted the slave somewhere around here, and it stuck out quite a bit, and it could interfere with the OEM cross member or radiator or fan. And so I think we're gonna try to tuck it underneath here a bit. Some compliance bushings, I think we can get it to work out. The original push rod looks like this, and it's going to push on the hydraulic clutch fork. But we're not going to be using this. We're actually install a Heim joint or spherical bearing inside here, which will attach to the arm. And I think I'm going to use one of these holes here. And most likely I'm going to use this outer hole here. That's going to give us the most amount of leverage. However, using the inner one will give us the shortest amount of stroke, but then also increase the pedal pressure here. So maybe I could set it up to where it's one or the other. Maybe it mounts on one side of the adapter bracket that I'm thinking of making, and it mounts on the other, depending on whether you want a softer pedal or not, or you want a faster engagement. I don't know, maybe we can work that into this. So we're also going to start off by removing this right here. So there would be a counterweight that's attached to this. I think it's missing off of this. Maybe it was a rubber bushing of some sort that looks like it broke off, but I'm gonna take these out, and there's gonna be some threaded nuts on the other side. We're gonna drill all of that out so we can install our new hardware. This Heim setup right here is what I was initially thinking. And I was thinking like, well, actually I was wanting to come on the back side of it, but we didn't have room for all of this. And then, so then we're looking at, okay, well, maybe we put it over here, and it would end up making the slave stick out quite a bit, but this still might be a solution, so we can't completely write this off. However, I did remember that I have joints like this here. Still wanting to keep the Heim joint behind the clutch arm so that the slave cylinder is as close to the transmission as possible. Something like this could work, although like trying to get it in there is kind of like an issue right now. I'm not exactly sure how that's going to work. And then drilling out the nuts is going to be problematic also. So I'm going to put this one on the drill press and drill it out until those nuts fall off, because I think we may need the space as much as we can. So with the nut still attached to the clutch arm, the heim joint sticks out a bit too much still. But if we remove the nut, then this whole part will countersink into the joint a little bit more. But perhaps still sticking on the end would still work. Then all we would need to do is put a nut on the other end of that. So this actually might be a viable issue, as we're just a viable solution, but it still sticks it on the outside of the transmission, which then means the slave is going to have to be somewhere right here. Now you can see that it's still like relatively behind the transmission, but if we change the geometry of the slave so that it's pushing up, straight up, rather it pulling like this, which, you know, might cause an obtuse load on the arm, we probably want it as straight as we could. And then when we do that, you can see how it sticks it out. So maybe we could play with how the slave cylinder attaches, maybe something like that. I was struggling a bit trying to figure out exactly what joint I was going to use, how I was going to attach this, and I think this might be the best way. I did try drilling out that nut completely, but it left a huge hole, which then would give me some issues with what ball stud I would have to use, maybe even a bigger one, because this hole ended up being like a 12 millimeter, and we're using an 8 millimeter ball stud right now, and I have no idea what a 12 millimeter ball stud would even look like, how big and giant that would be. But it actually turns out that this type of stud is going to work well for us, and the stud is long enough to where we can get a lock nut. So we'll still end up drilling through the nut so that we can get the ball stud through, and then our lock nut will just tighten up to the backside and lock up against the weld nut that's on the clutch arm. I think it's going to work out really well, except that it does bring out the rod pretty far. We actually might have enough space to bring this rod on the inside, and it would still work out. The geometry would be the same. The nut would then be on this side. It wouldn't look as cool and neat as this, but that would bring it closer in. So maybe we'll play around with both of those right now. But now what we're going to try to do is attach the slave here. And so we're going to build a template to hold the slave, the little plate that's going to bolt onto the side of the transmission here. I believe we're going to try to capture some bolts here, here, and here, and then it will extend out towards the clutch arm, just enough to hold the slave, something like that.
Hey, babes.
I've gone through a few different versions of the same type of geometry. I needed to make some clearances for the bolts, and it's starting to come out
all right, and we have decided just to go ahead and put the Heim on the inside. See, there's actually plenty of room here, so as it actuates through the stroke here, doesn't look like it's going to interfere anything. Well, maybe I'm just kidding. It looks like it's going to hit that nut if we're using the inside. And I'm not sure if that it actually needs to actuate all the way that high, or maybe we could just change this bolt to a button head, and that's going to be a lower profile if we needed the clearance. Again, if we were using this. And I believe we might end up using this just depending on how the bracket is going to fit. And it looks like the slave is going to be pretty close to this bracket and keep it straight.
You know, the concept of converting a cable transmission to use a slave cylinder originated with Hossport Performance. And they initially built this to put a Cable B Series transmission into a 92 to 95 Honda Civic. And the reason that they made a slave adapter fit the 92 to 95 slave cylinder is because that's the slave cylinder that's in that car. And I suppose what I'm wanting to do by using this slave cylinder is because we know that it works. But you know, it's giving me a hard time here trying to figure out how it's going to fit. I don't know why it took me so long, but it just dawned on me is that I don't need to use that slave cylinder. So I went through some of my shelves and I found one I think that will actually work a lot better for this scenario.
This right here I believe is out of an Acura TL. The way that it will bolt onto the plate, you can see this mounting plate right here is relatively straight. The bleed screw is pointing straight up. And then the way that the line is coming in is basically perfect for what we're trying to achieve here. Well, after several versions later, we are pretty close, man. I'm happy with this to start testing. We're able to build the flange on the other side here. I'll be able to cut some of this back. All the stuff I won't be using, I'll be able to clean it up, but really this is just a template now. We got the angle about where we want it, and now we're going to be drilling holes to match the bolt pattern of this slave cylinder on the back side of this flange. But just to give you an idea, it does look pretty simple, but look how many pieces we've had to go through, and that's, I think I might have like maybe 13 hours worth of work to get to this point. Now I need to locate where these holes are going to go on the flange here, and I'm going to use a set of center punch from Blue Point. It has this little indicator right here on the end, and we'll be able to just hammer this punch right in the center of our hole here. So there's a whole bunch of machined dowels here, and we found the one that fits the tightest. And so what we'll end up doing is just setting this up on our flange, and it is going to have an offset, something like this, just depending on the trajectory of the rod. It's hard to see the scores that are made by the tool, but I can see them. Like there's that one right there. We'll know we have a drill point there and there. And then once we find these holes,
then I'll be able to draw them in CAD and make really nice purpose-built part that you guys out there would just be happy to have on your project.
stop messing around with this jack here, I finally found a mount for the transmission. Believe it or not, these are hard to come by. I've had a few of them, but I sell them like every chance I get, and it's gonna be difficult to know how long I'll even have this one. According to the sales of these brackets right here, that suggests there's a lot of guys out there either doing manual swaps or they're putting a transmission like this back into a car. That's pretty awesome, because I probably had maybe a dozen of these in the last, I don't know, 3 months. Every single one of them have sold. But it's also a thing where this upper bracket cracks and breaks. So if you had this transmission, you would keep this mount bracket on the transmission, and you could use the replacement mounts from Hosfort. I think it's kind of innovative here. The stock replacements work with the stock engine bracket. After a few days, several revisions, we got it done. This right here is the final prototype right here. I don't know why I'm saying prototype. This is basically it. I know this video is only a few minutes long. However, this took me a couple of weeks to get figured out, and one of the biggest issues was getting this thing to bleed. The slave was actually more vertical than it is now, and we've changed the trajectory based on the trajectory of the cable arm, and now it's more ergonomic. I don't even know what to say, but we've gone through so many different revisions of this just to get the angle right, and then you get into some clearance issues, and so we're getting all this stuff finalized, and finally it works. Bleeding was probably our biggest issue, and we were thinking that something was wrong with the slave cylinder. We replaced the slave cylinder. We had one used. We went and bought a new one. We couldn't get it to bleed, and then it was like, well, maybe it's our clutch lines. We replaced the clutch lines. We replaced the clutch line out here. We replaced the bulkhead. I just wanted, you know what, since I was using used stuff, let's just start fresh so that we wouldn't have any issues. Everything was new. Even replaced the master cylinder with one that's new. We set up the reservoir here. Everything finally works. For you guys that are gonna get this kit, even if it was using on a B series or a K series, I've had guys call me and are just 100% that the master is bad. Well, we were experiencing that same thing too, and that's why we developed this chassis here, so that we can run these simulations based off of your experience. But we experienced some of the same things, and we were able to figure out what's actually going on here. So I maybe ran a gallon of fluid through here. Guys were having the same thing. I even took the master cylinder off of the bracket and the reservoir and hung it up for a few days on a ladder so that the air would draw all the way up, so we can try. We even tried a reverse bleeder, which is really nice, but what it came down to was this right here. If you experience this and your master is not leaking, that means the master is not bad, along with the slave cylinder. This right here is your adjustment. You want to go out or in. Well, in our case, we would build a bit of pressure, we'd build a little pressure and then we'd lose it. Or we'd have to pump it several times to get it to feel like there was pressure in there. And then once we stopped, it would go right back to the same place. So that just means that there's still air in there. Or, you know what, we just adjusted this out more by turning the rod out. It actually pushes the rod, it pushes the hind joint out more. We adjusted the pedal stop here so that the pedal can go in further, and then it started building pressure. It felt really good. I was like, okay, we're about maxed out on this because we don't want any pre-compression on the master cylinder, meaning this thing's only going to go so far until it starts. This is going to be maxed out, and then as you start spinning, it's just going to start running itself into the master, and that means the master is not going to get a full stroke. Over here, we have a rod that's on our slave cylinder now too. We basically threaded that out some, and that gave us just a little bit. I mean, just the tiniest bit of the tiniest amount, and then boom, it works. And so now I'm just going to demonstrate what it looks like. And it feels amazing. This feels like there's a bit of pressure. I do have an aftermarket pressure plate on here. That's gonna give us a little bit more pressure on the master than a factory pressure plate would. I let off the pedal, I come back on, I feel it, it feels great. It's moving the amount that we need it to.
So I have one final thing that we're gonna do on that bracket.
And what I want to try to do is eliminate some extra material on the bracket to give us a little bit more ground clearance. And you can see that it does hang down, not too much more than the actual transmission does. But that little hanger, that little piece that's hanging down right there, that's just below the transmission, we already took that out. And that's what this guy is right here. I cut this out of some thinner material just to make sure that we get.
So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna run some of these on the machine to get prepared for sale. I'll get them powder coated and I'll get one installed on here so you can see what the final product looks like off of the transmission and then on the transmission.
These came out fresh. Check that out. And these are the ones that we cut down. And it should clear. So now that I got these all cut up and powder coated, I'm going to take this guy off, install ours. Now I was able to remove this slave without having to re-bleed anything. That was awesome. I was paying attention to the piston in there. If the piston were to pop out, you'd lose all your pressure and you have to do all the bleeding all over again. But that worked out really well. And check out how much material was removed there. So I got it just underneath the slave cylinder, and I was just focused on making sure I had enough material at least for the bolt holes so that it retains most of its strength. So if we look back here at the transmission, if you remember, it was hanging pretty low. And I think you guys will enjoy it. I think it's a good looking kit. This is something that nobody's got. You'll be happy that you have it, especially if that's your goal, is to keep this transmission in the car, and people are gonna be like, what's going on here? I've never seen that before. I guess that's just what we do here. Make sure to check out our website. I'll have the link to this item built into the description below. Chances are there's going to be a few options here. I can see somebody already having a conversion of their own, or ones that are using a remote master cylinder, or ones that plan to use a remote master cylinder. They can add that part to that, or you can get a full complete kit from us, along with the master cylinder, the bracket, the clutch line, the slave adapter, all of that stuff. Guys, thank you very much for watching. Make sure to check out our other videos right here on our YouTube channel. And like always, happy tuning.